8 o'clock because we have
At
8?
we have a, I'm sorry, 6 o'clock. We have a tight agenda, and I'd like to be able to stop it at 10 of, so that we have about 10 minutes to, you know, just take a little quick break, grab some water, whatever, and before the rest of our meeting continues, because it does do have quite an agenda. I just wanted to mention that if you have an issue at home or something and you need to use your cell phones during a meeting, I think for your protection, and I think so we just don't make any other waves, that you just say, you know, I have an issue, and excuse yourself, and then, you know, this way you can go outside and do what you need to do, and you won't have to worry about, you know, if something is going on and you need to communicate back and forth. I do know that we use our phones to access our records and materials for our meetings. I know Ken has also sent out an email offering a Chromebook to everyone, and I would highly recommend that you get one and get it started and have the Chromebook available, so you don't have to print all these copies, and the district doesn't have to print multiple copies that we don't really need at home. So that was all I wanted to say, and thank you. Okay.
That still doesn't preclude someone from requesting your messages or your conversations that you have in the phone in the hallway, though, because it is during a meeting hour.
Well, I would think that you would be protected because you're,
One would think.
excused yourself, yes. Okay, our only item right now is to just have the discussion on streamlining board meetings and committee meetings, and, Doug, if you're ready.
Yeah, so, it may seem like a long time ago, but I did send an email, and hopefully you've got that handy for reference. I don't want to read through the whole thing, and again, I appreciate you all taking the time this evening, since we didn't have time for this at the retreat. Everything I'm sharing is just a suggestion, and really, I do feel like since I've been here about a year now, and because we've had about half the board turnover, it's a healthy time to have a discussion about these types of processes, and then, you know, whatever the board ultimately wants to do in this space, you know, I'm gonna support, the staff's gonna support, even if it means changing nothing. But really,
Doug, could we
yeah.
introduce Becky before we get started?
Oh, I didn't realize she was here.
Well, hello there.
I usually don't sneak in. I'm
Yeah.
quiet, as if I knew
Why
what.
don't you introduce yourself?
I thought that was Rebecca. Sorry. You know, yes, that's exactly what we need. You know, I don't recognize eyes. Yeah, I don't know how the kids do, but yes, welcome,
Yes.
Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. I go by Becca or Becky if you were around when my diapers were being changed. So, it's good to be here. I'm glad to be here with all you guys.
Glad to have you.
Welcome aboard.
Lucy and I have worked together a lot, so I'm surprised you don't recognize me, but.
Well, yeah, but you never walked around
That's
disguised,
true.
half
So
disguised.
Yeah, so some of what I share also dovetails with where I hope we're going with our strategic plan, and basically, I have the benefit or curse of, this is the 4th district I've worked in, so the kind of the things I've shared to me is kind of some best practices that I've seen from all those different districts. Again, may or may not work here, and it may or may not be what you all wish to do, but there's kind of 2 themes that walk through this. One is honoring the time of board members. You all are volunteers, which is wonderful, but I don't feel like any of you have unlimited amounts of time at your disposal, and also for the time that you do spend, to feel like it's the most meaningful and is having the most impact on our learners, on our district, on our community, and so, you know, really what I kind of point out here, and I actually discovered this even before I applied for this job, wasn't gutsy enough to bring it up during the interview process because I wanted to get the job, but you know, I saw all these committee meetings scheduled, and I just didn't understand it, because I'd never been anywhere where there were that many committee meetings scheduled or taking place. And again, not a criticism, not a judgment, just an observation. Having been here a year now, I've been in a lot of these committee meetings, and I think one of my key observations is that I feel like there's a lot of redundancy. I feel like a lot of what happens at a committee then gets rehashed at a board meeting. Another observation that's in the email is and we could change this practice, but our current practice is we don't live stream our committee meetings. And so there might be the feeling that sometimes in committee meetings, things get discussed and there's not as much, I guess transparency is the word we've been throwing around here, but there's just not as much visibility to that work. And so we could certainly fix that on the technology side if we wanted to. Another observation, and again, I'm new here, maybe this is different. In the places where I've been where we've had committees, and I've been at places where we've had them or we haven't, it would typically be 1 or 2 board members at the most operating that committee on behalf of the board. What I've noticed since I've been here is many, many board members attending. Sometimes and frequently more than a majority of the board attending. And so from where I sit with my lens as superintendent, those are really board meetings. And that again has, I think, a couple of challenges. One is that if you're a board member who doesn't attend one of those, you're kind of out of the loop and you get kind of a snapshot summary where you can go read the minutes or whatever. But again, from the board member time thing, I'm used to it being 1 or 2 board members if that's the model. And they agree they will do that on behalf of the other 9 or 8 of you. But when it's a lot, then it just feels like it's more board meetings. And so another issue, and again, maybe you all agree with this or maybe you don't. Sometimes I feel like the lines of authority get blurred a little bit in some of these committee settings. And this is nothing against Kim or Corey or Jen or anybody else, Kevin, whoever might be part of this, but a lot of times it's kind of like we're going to do student achievement and Corey's going to be like running that, or Kim's going to run utilization or whatever. And not that I'm not there, not that I can't be involved, but the model that I'm used to is the lion's share of what's being shared in those committee meetings, that the same people might share them, but they would share them here and it would be built into our regular board meeting agendas. And again, then the whole public would hear that, because I think a lot of what gets shared, the public might be interested in, or maybe they're not. I just don't know. And sometimes in the committee structure too, things get a little bit casual, and that's kind of an issue for me in the sense that these are official board meetings, and I don't think they should be casual. And one of the things I want to say is, and this I think is a plus for the district, I believe a lot of what we do in committees here comes from a place of wanting to engage the community to a greater degree. A lot of our committees have learners on them, have parents on them, have community reps on them, and I think that's awesome. I just think there's other ways we can engage the community in that way and not have it be through an official board committee. But again, just Doug Shook's opinion and just kind of my thoughts on that. So I don't know that I want to go any deeper into that, but just to say, even on top of that, we have some practices in our regular board meetings that I think we could talk about if you want to. This is the first place I've ever been where we've had 2 public comment periods in a given meeting. Recently, we've had some meetings where the same people get up twice and basically say the same thing. Again, I think the intent on that, for the way I understand it, is to put some discipline around that and limit people to only speaking about the stated agenda at the first public comment, and then anything else they want to at the second. I'm just accustomed to one that's kind of open-ended, but is time-bound, and also with the entire public comment period being time-bound. So if you have some type of sign-up sheet, the people that sign up first get to speak first, and when we run out of time, we would accept written comments, or the chairman could always use her discretion. Say 7 people spoke and the time ran out, the total time, say it was like 30 minutes or whatever, and there's one more person that wants to speak, she could exercise discretion and do that. But if there were 10 more people that wanted to speak, then it's almost like we should schedule something else, like a hearing or something for that issue or that topic, because in some districts I've worked in where that has not happened, 2 to 3 hours have gone by, and then the board's business doesn't get achieved that evening, because once they kind of start, they don't want to tell anyone that they can't speak. The other thing that I put in here, and that we talked about at the retreat, we're starting now to reach out and ask people to, who've been engaged in our reimagining work, to start signing up for some of these teams, to start drafting some actions around the draft plan. And in my perfect world, all of you would engage in that work as well, or at least some of you that have the time to do that. I think that would be really helpful for those teams and might also help us kind of do this more collaboratively. But I thought, like, how could I ask you to do that when you're already on all these other committees and spending all this other time? The last thing I'll say, and then we'll just kind of open it up, is I think what we're doing now, it was kind of almost fortunate that it did. Having a work session like this where we can go deep on one topic, whether it's this or strategic planning, or it could be budget, or it could be something about, school that might be closing or not closing or whatever. In my experience, those topics, which really involve the whole board, can be scheduled as a work session ahead of the regular meeting. And it does make like a night like tonight longer. But again, I don't know you all and what your personal schedules are, but the board members I've worked with in the past have always preferred a longer evening that's kind of everything gets done versus this one, and then a week from now we have this committee meeting and that. So I think I've said too much already. That's what's kind of in the email, and really any of this could start sooner versus later. I will say, as a practical matter, there is a statutory requirement for us sometime prior to May, and it's typically actually already been done, but at least 30 days prior to our first meeting in July, to actually adopt and post a meeting schedule and any committees that go with that. And we have held off from presenting that to you on this conversation. So if you're even entertaining some of this, one way you could go, and I put this in the email, would be to honor the calendar that's already been produced and the committees that currently exist. So we're not just kind of walking away from those committees and telling those folks, hey, we don't, but if we transition to this, maybe the time to transition to it would be starting in the 22-23 school year, if that makes sense.
Any thoughts? I know I have thoughts, but
Is tonight a test run, kind of we get here at 6? Perhaps 1 week, okay, maybe we need to do well-being and utilization. I don't know if you're breaking it out, or is it on an as-needed basis? Okay, we need to address well-being this month and policy this month, and then rotate it and so on.
Yes, great question, Jamie. First of all, I think we'd want to examine each committee individually to decide, based on kind of where we're going as a district, if they're the way to go going forward. Like, I think well-being, and again, this is nothing against the meeting we just had, we're gonna brief on it later. It was a great meeting, but like, to me, that shouldn't have been a board committee meeting. Like, we could have gone deeper and engaged more people on that topic in different ways. I think a perfect example, actually we got 2 of them tonight, that they just were kind of tailor-made. So Corey has a high school teacher coming in to present with her on a textbook that needs approval by the board. That would have typically been done at a student achievement meeting. But my thought would be, let's just bring these things to the board. Now, one of the things you may consider moving forward is maybe the night it gets presented, it's not voted on. Like, maybe it gets presented the first meeting, like just the information, and then you vote on it at the next meeting. That's what I'm kind of used to as well. Kim has something going on with the auditors as well. They would normally have come and given a very lengthy audit presentation during the ERC meeting. Instead, she's asked them to spend no more than 10 minutes presenting the findings of the audit later in our regular agenda. So I think it's a really good question. I think some of these things maybe would negate the need for that committee to meet at all, because we would just force it into their regular meeting. And other things, and I'd put well-being in this category, it may need a whole other process, like that advisory process that I suggested, where we could engage a whole larger group of individuals and structure it in a way that it doesn't have to comply to, we have to post it as an agenda, and we have to do all the things that the board committee meetings would do. Let me say one more thing too, and I meant to say this, but I didn't, and she probably doesn't want me saying this, but I'm gonna say it anyway. So Meg does an awesome job at all parts of her job. Setting up all these committee meeting agendas and minutes and coordinating all that is a significant time drain for her. And she's an hourly employee, so there are other things that I would like to put on her and that she'd like to be doing. And we don't often get to it. And so the week that we had the retreat, we had 3 committee meetings scheduled. We canceled them all. We were more prepared for that retreat than we probably would have been, because the 2 of us could just focus on that. And I thought it was a really good retreat. And so again, that's not to say we can't do committees and that Meg won't do that. It's just another factor to consider in a district our size, where you only have a limited number of people to do the work that you've got.
Just a little clarification with regard to the approval of the textbook. It would have been presented at the Achievement Committee meeting, but then brought to the regular board meeting and
Correct.
approved at the board meeting.
Correct.
Not at the Achievement Committee meeting.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
So
Thank you
it's-
for that.
There's a double piece to it. Yeah.
Correct, correct. And probably some of that information would have had to been repeated, and any
Right.
board member who wasn't at student achievement, who needed information answered to feel good about their vote, we might have ended up just repeating some of the same things.
Okay, any other questions, thoughts?
I think one of the things, Doug, that concerns me is that in the past, a lot of the board members controlled the agendas for what was gonna happen at the meeting. Under your scenario, mostly it's gonna be controlled by the superintendent or the staff. And so you're gonna get basically information that is wanna be presented or needed to be presented to the board, rather than the board, some members of the board who like to talk about, what's going on in sports or what's going on in student achievement, and those things. We had contact with staff on some of those issues, that we may not. With Kim, a lot of the stuff that we went over with is really more, how do we get into what are the options of finance, and what are the things that, there's a lot of detail we can get into that only involves a few people. Kim and Bob Martino used to spend lots of time dealing with stuff that, the rest of the board wasn't concerned about, but really was focused on that individual board member, and his concerns. So some of that stuff might be lost, and it really kind of depends on whether the board wants to focus down or focus up, and it's just more of a philosophy, right? I think both will work. And I'm not saying it won't work, I just think that, there's some things that, the board, would like to get into in detail that, that it's their particular issue, they'd like to have a way to do it in a smaller group, perhaps. I think the personnel committee has to stay. It only meets for 2 things, 1 to hire a superintendent, or 2 to give you your evaluation, so
That's each
uh,
other,
that
yeah.
personnel committee needs to be,
Has that
Well, there are
that
certain
committee
things
has
that
not
have
met
to
since
stay.
I've been here. At
HR.
least I've not been part of it.
No,
and you
no,
wouldn't
it
be
hasn't.
part of it.
Okay, okay.
Building and finance can't go because those are 2 positions that have elected, well, not building committee, but
Well,
finance
building
committee has
committee's
elected.
building committee's a good example. Building committee isn't technically even a board committee.
Yeah.
It's
not
a,
really
it's a,
board.
it's a
Right.
state required committee, correct me if I'm wrong, Kim, if we want to get like state reimbursement, it's their way of making sure that we're engaging knowledgeable people in the construction fields. And yeah, so I put that on there as a required one because I don't think that goes away.
It doesn't fit your model anyway.
No, and I think, Bob, your point is a good one, and like I said, we can move wherever we want with this. I think, to your point about individual board members want certain things or whatever, I think that's actually kind of making my point, that with 10 board members, if all of them want individual things, I just don't know that it's practical, to do some of these things. And, you gave the example of Kim, we hire Kim to do the financial stuff, and if board members are interested in that, she's happy to give them the time. To me, that's still not a committee. And I think in terms of the topics themselves, the way that I've always handled this in the past is that everywhere I've been, the board has had some type of policy or bylaw that
Yes.
says any board
I was gonna
member
say that.
can request anything to be on a board agenda through the chairman. And what we've been starting to do, started with Bob when he was chairman, you know, Bob and Meg and I would meet to go over the agenda and talk about things that we thought we should have on there, and he would bring things on that I think you probably heard from other board members too, and we're doing it now, and we're including the secretary as well. And so Lindsay and Lucy and Meg and I are doing that, and certainly they have more influence as the officers in those meetings, but, I mean, the spirit of this and the letter of it, in my experience, is that I think anything that any board member wants on the agenda should just be on the agenda. And then if a lot of board members don't want it on the agenda, when you get to that approval of the agenda, you amend it. I've seen that done rarely. I think the way that I've seen it work the best is you wanna honor each board member's kind of thoughts, and if there is a topic, we do that. That may not be getting at everything that you're saying, but my hope would be that if we switch to something like this, that we would continue that. And I mean, do you agree with that, Lucy? That are people contacting you and asking you to put things on the
Not
agenda
at
right
this-
now?
Not at
Okay.
this point in time, but what I'm thinking is, I was gonna say, we do have a policy, and I'm not sure everyone was aware of it, that you can get in touch with myself and let me know before the next meeting to say you would like to put such and such on the agenda. So that's already in one of our policies. And what I can do is, like, you know, a week before our meeting, is just send out a reminder, is there anything you'd like to have on the agenda? So you get like a double thing, and that just,
So I
you
guess
know.
the concern that Bob has is then,
Okay, and you have to.
so I guess the concern that Bob has then is, what about if a certain board member or yourself or somebody is not in agreement that should be on the agenda? How does that get discussed? Or are we gonna just put whatever is recommended by everyone on the agenda?
You know, I'm not sure we ever, you know, in the 6 years I've been on the board, I'm not sure we ever really ran into that, generally. Well,
There
we
was-
send out the
there was an
agenda
issue
initially
before you
for
came on
everyone,
board.
and it can be
One issue.
it can be amended before it actually.
It
goes
often
to
is
the
amended
hearing.
more on our side because we're adding something or we forgot something,
Yeah,
or there's
it's
information
time.
that wasn't available. But again, a lot of times these approval of the agendas are pretty procedural votes, and I think they should be. You don't wanna spend all your time arguing about what should be on the agenda.
Right.
But in my experience, to your point, or your question, John, when there has been something that maybe only one board member cared about, and nobody else really felt like it was worth the board's time to discuss it, they might call that person and ask them to take it off, but if they weren't willing to do it according to the bylaws, then when the meeting started, somebody would say, I recommend the approval of the agenda, but deleting item number 3. Or, you know, and then you have to talk about that.
And then it's a vote.
And then it's a vote.
I get
And-
it.
yeah.
If majority says take that item off, you take it off.
Yeah, I'm totally good with that. I'm just asking the question. I mean, because
Right.
obviously if
Yeah.
there's
Oh,
been
that's
some
good.
animosities in the
That's good.
past,
Right.
we don't
right.
want those animosities to be here.
Again,
Just
unless the
make sure
agendas get
everyone's being heard.
crazy, in my experience, it's a good practice to let any board member add any agenda item, because if it's important to them, you know, it's probably important to talk about. The chairman can always control if that discussion is going on too long, or maybe even suggest, hey, maybe we should defer this next month when we have more information, or things like that.
So this might be an unpopular, popular opinion. We have so much going on. This is like, to get rid of these committees right now, I think is a really bad idea. I think it sends a message that we already have so much on our plate between budget, between the referendum, everything going on. We're gonna have community members that are already upset about the current situations with the pandemic, with Lyman, with the budget, with a lot of things. So then we're gonna tell people that, we're not gonna do committees anymore. I think we stick with the committees we have this year. Maybe if we need to cancel some because we have too much going on, then we should cancel some. But I don't think that we need to be changing it until the fall. And I think in that time, it would give the new board members a chance to be on some of these subcommittees to find out truly if we believe these subcommittees are good. Most of us, unless we've been to them, don't know what they're really about. So to give an opinion on whether we should keep them, I'm sorry, I can't talk. For us to keep them, I can say for certain because I have been to most of them, some of them, not all the committees, but I just think we need to give the full board a chance to be at those meetings first and run some of them.
No, your thought was in the fall, anyway.
That was what I thought. Again, I don't know where you all are. I know that I have bumped into some individuals, even in the run-up to the fall election, when people were considering who was gonna run, and they said things to me like, I would be on the board were it not for all these committees and things like that. And you can read that statement one of two ways. Well, if you're not committed, then you shouldn't run. But what I feel like is, and this is no judgment here, but like some of you are retired and you have more time available, and some of you have full-time jobs and young children at home and things like that. And I think a board functions the best when it has a mixture of all those elements. But I think for those that do have the full-time jobs or the young kids at home and things like that, we don't want to make serving on the board something that they just feel like they can't do, or we're never going to get those folks. And again, that's my personal opinion and just something that I heard in the community. And again, I'm not picking on the retirees or the working parents or any of those things. It's just, and that's been true in every district where I've been. We've tried to make serving on the board, which is a volunteer thing and very thankless many times, oftentimes maybe, something that we were trying to honor their time and make their time most useful. And that's a constant process that we try to do. So yes, I think fall, I think Lindsay's suggestion is better because we have all these meetings on the books, and to her point, we can cancel them if there's not something burning to do. And you know, we can go back to taking textbooks to student achievement and audits to ERC or any of those things. Again, Lucy was willing to give this a shot, and I thank you for doing that, just to kind of give us an example of what it might look like next year, if that's what we want to do.
We could still do those workshops now, though. We could be doing both if we want to, or every other meeting, we could do a workshop to keep it going like this. That way, if we get to a point in, say, June, when we've all been through a couple of these meetings, we can revisit it and say, yeah, it's something we want to do come fall. Right?
To kind of get a taste for both.
Yeah, well, that, as long as that's not just adding more on
It's a lot of
people's
time.
plates. You gotta come
Well,
to all
I
these
said
committee
every other
meetings, and you gotta come an
Yeah.
hour early.
Well, that's what I was gonna say, is like, for instance, tonight, there's 17 things on the regular agenda. And it's the first time we're seeing the budget. So every time it's budget season, we tend to be here for hours and hours. And
Every 2
for me,
weeks.
it's just a lot, working all day, trying to run my kids around, and then coming an hour early, and then knowing I'm probably not gonna get home until 10 or 10:30 tonight. And for me, like, my brain doesn't work that well when I start getting tired, like, I start shutting off, and I'm not, and like, I think in 2 weeks, I'm afraid to look at my phone.
Yeah, it's not
But
bad.
in 2 weeks, like, we have policy and something else, and then we have the full board meeting. Or not policy, I think it's student achievement.
No,
And that's
policies-
usually at
policies next
4.
Right?
I don't know, that's play rehearsal, I don't know, there was 1 week where, it's not until March, but March 23rd, we have a student achievement meeting at 4, policy at 5, and then we're supposed to have a board meeting at 7. And I know, like, some of these got changed before you came, cause CAF thought that it would be better to just do it all in one day, and I think sometimes that's okay, but I feel like budget season is just hectic enough, usually. So I mean, I'm happy that we're having this discussion, and I think it's a good try, but like, I don't know that every 2 weeks I really wanna, or can sit here for 3 to 4
Okay,
hours.
so to that point, and I'm glad you brought that up, Missy, thank you. Kim and I have talked about this. I am not accustomed to having this every 2-week thing during budget season. Again, it's been the tradition here, and so, you know, we're supporting it. I am used to a budget presentation on a night like tonight, and then 1 or 2 budget work sessions being scheduled prior to, like, the next month's meeting or whatever, to where in those work sessions, you're just talking about budget, and then when you get to the regular meeting, you're doing everything else. And so it still makes for the long night, but you're not doing it every 2 weeks. And
that would, I mean.
yeah, and again, our budget processes work differently in different places. In my last district, we scheduled, I think, 3 budget work sessions just in case we needed them. Most budget seasons, we did 1. because board members asked all their questions, kind of like the Google thing that we'll hear about later, and all of that, and it was very thorough. I think here, our tradition has been to just talk about different pieces of the budget and spread it out more along more meetings. And again, if you guys prefer that, that's fine too, to kind of take it in smaller chunks. But the net result is our calendar then has this every 2-week thing going, which I agree, it's a lot. And it's a lot for staff too.
Well, I think we've done
Yeah.
it both ways, right? Kim, or was that before you came? I feel like when I first started coming, not before I was on the board, before, and I first started coming to the meetings, that like there was one night where it was like really long and everything was just thrown out there, and then it started getting broken down.
Correct.
Okay. So it's been both ways. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's a right or a wrong answer, I just, you know, I'm willing to put in the time, but I just wonder, you know, after we sit here for 2 to 3 hours, how much are people absorbing after that amount of time?
That's a good point.
In the past, the other budget meetings have only had budget issues on them, not a full agenda, but stuff always happens to come up and say, well, can we stick this on because something happened, you know? But normally the meeting on the 23rd of February would just be on the budget. And then we were able, the last 2 years, we've canceled some of the last week or two because board had really come to a conclusion. And all we needed then was the public hearing.
I mean, I think the end of March or into April, like it's 3 weeks in a row that we have more of the meetings scheduled, which if we need them, that's fine, but it gets to be a lot.
Well, I don't want to speak for Kim, but like in our conversations, we're all about streamlining the budget process and fewer meetings and more kind of working towards consensus to Bob's point. We don't want to rush through it, obviously. And I think, I think I was speaking to kind of my experience last year, maybe because of COVID or whatever. It seemed like they may have been on the calendar because of budget, but we actually programmed them as regular meetings, and budget was just a part of them. That kind of goes back to the work session concept, like it is now. When you call a budget work session, you just come in, you start the meeting, you start talking about the budget. You don't have reporters, and you don't have public comment, and you don't have all the other committee reports and everything else that is kind of part of the regular
And
agenda.
that has come up in the past.
talked about that.
We have talked
Yeah.
about that in the past, trying to cut all that other
Yep.
stuff out so we could just
During budget.
focus on the budget.
Yep.
Right, that has come up in the past.
There will be some time savings too, where we won't have to have individual committee reports, which sometimes can become lengthy. Student achievement, you took great pride in, you know, but sometimes it would be 3 and 4 reports that did eat up a good chunk of the time, and, you know, it's all great, but again, at some point your attention wanes, and, you know, the average attention span of a child today is 4 minutes. I don't know what it is for adults, but.
It depends on the time of day, what time you get up in the morning, how old you are.
Well, I do have to say, like, our committee minutes are actually, I don't know who actually does them, but I think it's the same one we send out for our meetings,
That's
right?
right. Yeah.
But they're actually, they're incredibly detailed.
Very thorough.
So what is it to say that you can't just say, let's
They
just,
are.
Right.
you know, is there any discussion on that? Has everyone read the minutes and then just move on, rather than just keep wasting?
Especially when
time?
half the people have already been to that meeting.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
because some of the stuff does get lost.
That's
in-
the thing, I
in
feel like if
summary.
you put the information out from the meetings ahead of time, it should be pretty much a no-brainer when it comes to the
Sure.
meetings.
Then people should review it, and then if there's questions, we can have a discussion.
It's incumbent on each one of us to read it.
Mhm, yeah. You know,
So
I
you're
think-
suggesting not even have a formal committee report?
I mean, I'm okay with like a 1 or 2 sentence summary, but when you start talking for 5 or 10 minutes about something that half the people already heard, that's to me when it gets redundant.
Well, and
I
to
think
your,
certain things are important,
yeah,
but
and to your point, Missy, what I've noticed, and again, I don't wanna pick on Corey and Kim, but they're the two that I've noticed this on since I've been here. The board member will start down that path, and then they'll say, now, Kim, remind me of exactly what we kind of talked about, or Corey, and now they're kind of replaying everything they did, and before you know it, like 15 minutes have gone by, and people are asking questions, and it almost felt like we're having a second committee meeting
Right.
at that point. So I think, you know, whatever we could do to try to fix that, I think would just be a time saver for
and
everybody.
sometimes it's important. I mean, I have to say, like, there was a ton of minutes to read, and like, the ones that were revised, I'm like, I don't even know what was different than what was revised, you know what I mean? So, yeah, I mean, the more that you can read before you come, and then if there's, because I feel like Meg usually gives them, you know, enough time for us to review all of that. I'm wondering specifically about utilization, and maybe this will be talked about later after we talk about what happened with the referendum. I mean, that's a meeting that keeps getting canceled because we don't really need that committee right now, is what we were thinking.
We may need it again.
Yeah, we might need it.
Right.
I would say that one probably, since I've been here, is the most guilty of being redundant.
Yeah.
And I would also say, again, not a judgment, just an observation, when we were having utilization committee meetings and talking about whether we're gonna close or not close a school, like, that was just new to me, cause in my last district, we did that, but anytime we talked about closing a school, it was like the whole community heard the whole conversation, and I would think anything, in my opinion, that would be as big as on a utilization to do with Lyman's sake, in this case, I would want that at a work session of the board or as a board agenda item. And I think probably a work session, and again, I know we don't wanna make every meeting an hour longer, but I would think every board member would wanna be involved in that discussion. And I think what you saw was, when those topics were on utilization, sometimes we'd have 8 board members because it was so important, and the other 2, it's because they just couldn't. They had a conflict or something like that. So
is this being live streamed right now?
Yeah.
This being live streamed?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it
So
is,
in
and I
your
think it should
model,
be, yeah.
how would things go, like, well-being? Would that go to like an advisory committee? Because I know at well-being, we talked about it changing, like, maybe it could change a format. Would student achievement, I mean, would we wanna change that to something where we just bring that into regular meetings where we have that stuff come in? Like, I just don't wanna lose the spirit of some of the committees that we have.
Yeah, I think those 2 committees operate very differently. And again, it's just my observation. I feel with student achievement, and Corey runs lead on that, does a really good job with that. I think it's a lot of presenting information and kind of informing the board about a lot of the good stuff that's happening in the district. And yes, there's also a review of test scores and things like that. In my experience, that stuff has always been presented at a full board meeting, and I think it should be. And I think when it's presented at a full board meeting, it'll also be more kind of streamlined because, you know, not that Corey's lengthy in her presentations or whatever, but when she knows she's got a whole committee meeting, she may approach it differently than if she's one of 17 items. And the distinction would be, if Corey needs an hour or 45 minutes or whatever, then we go to Lucy and Lindsay under the current leadership and say, could we schedule a work session to go over test scores or whatever it is, and we'd be in this format right now, and Corey would lead the group and share all that information, and the whole public would have access to it through the live stream. And so that's that piece. Well-being, I still kind of struggle with that just because its heart is in the right place and it's out there to do, but it's just a kind of an odd compilation of people that come together, and it almost feels like the last meeting. We're just trying to check in with people and see how they're doing. I don't know that that's a board committee. I think there's other ways to get to that. And again, in my experience, we've gotten to that with a much larger group that was, and again, no disrespect, fewer board members and more learners and more teachers and all of that. And those 1 or 2 board members would be representing the board in that setting. So again, that's a very different model, because there were like 6 of you there last week for that?
Yeah.
You know,
But there's only 3 members.
well, I know, but if they show up, the kind of public face of it, it looks like there's 6 board members there, and that to me changes the dynamic of what the committee kind of
I
does.
think it would be great to hear from other people in the community too, like you said, like maybe different students at different
Like
times.
it was all
and
strong teachers.
different
and-
parents, like it's the
Yeah.
same, you know, even different staff members, it's the same staff members, so you're only getting one perspective of
Yeah,
how District 13
and
is.
just so I'm clear, and those of you that have been through the reimagining would know this, the advisory concept, and we only did this the last 3 years in my last district. I wish we discovered it in my first 8 years there, but, because we had a different kind of setup too. There's a larger group, but you're also putting them in small groups. and you're throwing out issues like, you know, how you doing with COVID or some of the same things, and they're discussing them with 3 or 4 people so that all of them can really engage. And then there's some sharing out, and you do some surveying, and we used to run our budget through that group. We used to run very difficult issues through that group. We had a Confederate flag issue at one of our high schools that was highly controversial, and it was so helpful to be able to go to these 40 individuals, 12 of which were learners, in small groups, and let them process. And then we were able to come back to the board and say, look, we kind of did this at advisory, and this is kind of what they told us. Either they had consensus around it, or they were divided. You know, and so it was just a different way of engaging our stakeholders, but one that seemed to work very, very well. Now, it's not an insignificant amount of work, like on my part or the staff's part, to kind of structure all that, but we'd be willing to do it. It's just, to do that and do all these committees too, and ask some board members, and then the strategic plan, it just seems like, I don't want to be a hypocrite here and end up asking you guys to do more than you're already doing, when my goal is to have you do less or at least the same and just do it kind of differently. So again, maybe you just want to think about that for some point, because I don't want the message to be that the board or the superintendent or the staff doesn't care about the well-being of the community or of the learners or of the employees. I mean, if you look at the draft strategic plan that we presented, wellness is one of the 4 things, and so we think we can go much deeper and farther in that area. And a group like that could tell us if we're actually making a difference in that space, or if we're just talking about well-being or wellness, which you know, I mean, can happen.
When Doug and I first had this discussion about the revamping of the committees, one of the things that, the reason why I kind of caught up with it and kind of latched onto it is, I've been on the Achievement Committee for a number of years, and what's discussed at that Achievement Committee is so vital, and that's something that shouldn't be within the confines of a small committee, and then, you know, just shared as in a summary for the public, because the committee is not, you know, broadcast. That's something that should be part of our regular meetings, so that it's televised, it's publicized. I mean, that's our nuts and bolts, is Achievement Committee.
Okay.
And I think that was one of the biggest reasons why I thought, wow, that's where it should go. It should belong as part of our meetings, or if it's a lengthier discussion, because I know sometimes they're usually just about an hour, but if it's something that's a little bit more in-depth that needs to be shared, then it could be a work session, but it's televised, it's publicized, it's out there, and people need to know that. As far as, and also the other reason why, you know, Doug and I had continued the discussion was, you know, how do we do some streamlining of some of these committees? I think one of the things we need to decide is, you know, and you can think about it, and, you know, send out an email, and you know, for everybody, just one, anyway, we'll start out with one.
Don't reply
Yeah,
all.
don't reply all, just send out your comment and let it go with that, you know. You know, which committees do we think we would like to see as part of our regular board meetings on a regular basis? Do we feel that there's gonna be enough time? I think of discussions like on policy committee, which can sometimes get a little bit lengthy, but we don't have a lot of policy committee meetings. Those just sort of come up over time. So, you know, where might that be put?
Well, there's more on the calendar than there ever has been in the past.
Pardon?
Policy. There's one like scheduled every month right now.
Yeah.
And that was never the case before. It was only like an as-needed thing, but then we weren't having enough and this and that.
You weren't
So-
having, right, we weren't
I mean, the
having
other
enough.
thing that I think we need to look at is how many people are on each committee, and do we need that many people? Like, if we're gonna keep the committees, like, that's fine. I'm on 6, and other people are only on 2 or 3. And I just think we need to look at the equity of that. And
Oh, yeah, that is a fluid document, definitely. I mean, it was just put together kind of like what was before, and try to put in what, you know, something new, and still not knowing who our new member was going to be as well. So it needs to be revamped again. I would just like to put out a suggestion that, because I think student achievement is really the nuts and bolts of why we're here, that I would like to ask, maybe we can pilot for the remainder of the year, to have student achievement on our regular board meetings. You know, and I'll say for every board meeting, but that's only if there's a presentation. It'll kind of be like, you know, staff reports. If you have one, you share it. It's just a suggestion that I have. And if we need, you know, Corey needs to discuss something further, or we have questions, don't forget, we can also request that we can ask about student achievement. And you put that out there, so therefore if we need it, we put it out for a little bit longer. We do a work session on it. I would like to ask
Is that instead of the 4 o'clock meetings? That would-
Yes, that the student achievement be part of our regular meeting or part of a work session before one of our meetings. So that would be the one committee that maybe we can sort of pilot and see how that works. And then, we can keep the schedule of the other committees that we have, but cancel them if there really isn't any reason for that particular committee to meet.
Would it make sense
Just a
to-
thought. In the meantime, we could be thinking about which committees we would like to, you know, we can decide if we want to keep the committees, or not, or how we can combine them. I like the idea of the well-being being more of an open, more of a larger community kind of a setting, and, you know, just something a little bit different with well-being. Building committee got its own piece. I'm not sure where utilization is gonna be, in the future. You know, we have a couple of big issues coming with the budget, and we also have Lyman that's out there, and that really is going to need some very heavy-duty thinking and planning and processing to see how we're going to go forward and how we're gonna make sure that the message gets out as best as can be, because that issue has been out for too many years. New people have moved into town, information has gotten all skewed. I'm not even 100% sure what half of what we decided, even though I was part of it all, because it's just been going on for so long. So we need to kind of step back and say, where do we go from here with that? And that, I think, is a whole entity in and of itself, besides the budget. So if I can make that suggestion that, you know, let's try with achievement, make it part of our board meetings, and if necessary, have it as a work session. As far as budget meetings, I don't know how you feel about budget discussions, either having them as part of our board meetings or do them an hour before, not necessarily every other week, but, you know, I don't know. I'm not sure what you wanna do about the budget. We could think about it. We don't have to decide right now.
Well,
But
we
how
haven't
wanna
seen it
go
yet,
forward, 'cause we
so-
wanna have.
Kinda depends on what the
Let's
budget
see what
is.
it looks like.
The other thing is, if you do put it as a workshop ahead of time, you're kind of stuck for time. If you get 55 minutes into it and you're actually making progress, all of a sudden now you have to stop for your meeting.
I know,
Versus if
that's
you were
one
to
of
just
my.
leave it in the
That's-
regular.
That's one of my
that's-
concerns,
that's
is the time.
true. Yeah,
Is
yeah.
the time, because some of these committee
So-
meetings have gone
I'd like,
longer.
And
I'd
let me-
like
and
to
let
see
me
them
rephrase how
streamlined,
this
but I
used to
don't
work in my
wanna
last
lose how
district.
much time we're spending as a board on this work
Right.
as subcommittees. So making it happen beforehand, that's great, but I think we're gonna lose the hours that I find really important. Like, I'd rather pilot something like policy that possibly could get done in an hour, as opposed to student achievement.
How often does you and resource committee actually have issues?
I've never been to a meeting of it, so
It's really just to do
Twice a year.
his
Yeah,
review.
policy doesn't meet that often. It
Jay, just to
depends.
your point really quickly, and if I misspoke before, I apologize. So my previous district only had one regular meeting a month. So in budget season, we would program the budget presentation, which was always 10 to 15 minutes max, like it's gonna be tonight, hopefully. Kim and I think and not a whole lot of discussion about it that night, because we're just giving it to the board at that point. And then the work session would not be before another meeting. It would just be a budget work session. So we might still have that February 23rd meeting, but it would be budget only. And I think the board members were kind of motivated to, even if they had to spend 3 hours that night, to knock it out and not have to then come back 2 weeks later and 2 weeks. A lot of times what they would do is they'd put on that agenda and potential adoption of preliminary budget. If they were ready, they would do it. If they wouldn't, they had 1 or 2 more scheduled. So I think it's a good point that you've made there. On that, we did not back that up to a regular meeting.
And I'm not sure if the new members realize that we do have a Google Docs that gets put out, Kim usually puts that out. And, you know, all the budget stuff is there, and you can ask questions as a board member. You can write in your question, we can all see it, and Kim will answer, and then when she comes back to a full meeting, she does review. So that, you know, we don't just only talk about the budget during the budget workshops. There's an ongoing question and answer that, you know, clarification that goes on throughout the months until the budget is voted on. So you have plenty of opportunities to ask questions and have stuff clarified in between meetings.
I don't wanna cut this off, but you
I know,
talked about a
it's
break
good.
and it's 6:51,
Yes, I know, I'm on
so.
10 of, yep. So, I don't know where we are. Okay, I guess just to bring some closure, think about what we discussed. We won't make any decisions, and just, you know, send your thoughts along, and we'll try to put them together, and I'll send something out with a summary, and maybe the next meeting we can sort of pull it together a little bit. Great discussion, thanks.
You want thoughts just to you directly, or do we do the whole board and
can
but just
send
nobody
everybody
reply?
your first, I think your first, I would say that your first response could go to everybody,
Just no
but
one
then no
replies
back
back.
and forth as
Okay.
to how you feel, unless it just comes directly
So
to
if
me.
each person sent
Otherwise
their
it
thoughts,
becomes-
but
yeah.
include everybody?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so, this
think
way at
that's
least
smart, 'cause then
everybody's
we can-
aware of what's been said,
Yep.
but we don't continue the discussion,
Okay.
right? Yep, okay.
I don't know if we can, just quick listen, even though it falls into this, or if we need to add it to another workshop, but I wanna, visit online public comment, the possibility of adding it. Because right now we don't follow our town formats, and all of our town formats allow for public comment online. So I'd like to add it at some point. We don't have to do
Yeah,
that tonight.
yeah, I'm not sure what you mean, but, about that, something else I was gonna say, but anyhow. Okay, let's just take a little break before our next meeting. We'd like to start right at 7, because we do have quite an agenda. Thank you. Thank you, Bill.
Yeah.